This really happened to me, and even now at my age, I still get a chill whenever I think about it. It all began under the dim glow of the old kitchen table lamp, the one with a crooked shade that had been in my house since the 1970s. Stacks of dusty bank statements were spread across the scarred oak surface. I remember running my hand over them, the paper rough under my fingertips. My eyes narrowing as I noticed something that didn't sit. Right on the checks I never signed was handwriting I knew as well as my own, my nephew's careless scrawl trying too hard to mimic me dragging letters in ways my steady hand never did. And in that moment the betrayal hit like a knife, my own blood. Someone I had practically raised as a son had been siphoning off my life savings for years while smiling in my face. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is. Right now, it's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I guess I should start further back so you understand just how deep this cut really went. I was born in 1955 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when the steel industry was still the city's beating heart. My earliest memories are of black smoke pouring out of the mills of the Monongahela River, carrying the sheen of oil and ash, and of neighbors who lived hard but stood by each other like family. My parents raised me in a red brick row house not far from Southside, where everyone knew who you were, who your parents were, and which parish you belonged to. Family was everything back then. It wasn't just a word, it was the rule you lived by. My father worked shifts at Jones Laughlin Steel, while my mother cleaned houses. They hammered into me the idea that loyalty was sacred. That blood was a bond you never broke. That lesson became even more real when my younger sister, Diane, was born. She was 6 years younger, full of life and laughter, always chasing me down the alleyways, her pigtails flying. As she called my name, I protected her like a second father. When kids teased her, I stepped in. When she was scared of thunderstorms, I let her curl up on my bed. That bond between us never wavered. Years rolled by, and I grew into a man who carried those same lessons. I followed in my father's footsteps working at the mill. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. The kind of work where sweat and calluses built your dignity. Diane, meanwhile, married young and had a son, Daniel. I remember the day he was born at Magee Women's Hospital. I stood by the nursery window, my hand pressed against the glass. Watching that tiny squirming body wrapped in a blue blanket, I whispered to myself, that boy's going to be something. But life, cruel as it can be, had other plans. Diane was only in her 40s when cancer took her. I sat by a hospital bed at UPMC Shadyside, holding her frail hand, promising her through tears that I would look after Daniel. Her husband, well, he was gone not long after the funeral. Couldn't handle the grief, or maybe just didn't care enough to try. Either way, he left that boy had no one but me, so I stepped in. Danielle was 11 when he moved into my house. I wasn't a father, not officially, but I became one in every way that mattered. I worked double shifts at the mill, just to make sure there were presents under the Christmas tree. I took him to Steelers games at Three Rivers Stadium, bought him hot dogs and foam fingers, and cheered until our voices cracked. I taught him how to ride a bike in Shenley Park, how to throw a baseball, how to work hard for what you wanted. I thought I was doing right by him. Years blurred together the way they do when you're busy surviving. By the time I retired, my body was worn down from decades. At the furnace, arthritis set into my knees. My back screamed every morning, but I had something to show for it. A modest pension. A savings account I built dollar by dollar, and a home I'd paid off. Daniel, now grown, never left my side. He lived nearby, and when I got older, he started coming around more often, helping me with errands, fixing things around the house, even setting up online banking when the world turned digital. To me, he was loyal, my pride and joy. To him, I later realized I was nothing more than a vault he could plunder. It started small. So small I almost missed it. A bill payment scheduled on the wrong date. A strange charge on my debit card from a restaurant in Philadelphia, a place I had never stepped foot in. When I asked Daniel, he chuckled like I'd said something silly. Uncle Joe, you probably forgot. Or maybe the bank messed up. Happens all the time. And for a while I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was family, my only close family. But the mistakes piled up. A weekend stay at a hotel in New York, cash withdrawals. I didn't remember I tried to shrug them off, telling myself, maybe I was getting forgetful. Maybe age was catching up faster than I realized. The idea stung, but it seemed more believable than the alternative that Daniel could be stealing from me. One afternoon, when I went to the PNC branch downtown to ask about a fee, the manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Edwards, pulled me aside. Her voice was careful, almost pitying Mr. Mancini, she said, folding her hands on her desk. You've made several large withdrawals this year. Are you sure you want to keep pulling from your savings so often? Her words froze me. Withdrawals, I asked. I haven't touched my savings in years. She frowned, tapped a few keys, and then slid a stack of signed slips toward me. My name scrawled across them in shaky strokes. I stared at them, my stomach dropping. The signature was mine, close enough to pass, but I could see it. The little quirks of Daniel's handwriting bleeding through. Letters slanted just wrong. The lazy curl of his J. My chest went tight. For a moment I thought I might collapse right there in that office. I stumbled out into the daylight, my legs trembling, the city spinning around me. And that's when it clicked. Not just the charges, not just the oddities, all of it. Daniel had been stealing from me for years. The betrayal crushed me, but under the weight of that pain, something else stirred. A fire, a refusal to let him strip me bare and walk away, smiling. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the same lamp buzzing faintly. Above, bank statements spread like evidence in a courtroom. For the first time, I didn't see Daniel as the boy I raised the one I taught to throw a ball. I saw him for what he was, a criminal, and in that moment I swore to myself I would bring him down no matter the cost. The hardest part was hiding the storm inside me. Every morning after that I faced Daniel, with the same tired smile, pretending nothing had changed while rage boiled in my chest. He still came by to help, still poured through my kitchen drawers like he owned them, still called me Uncle Joe, in that lazy, smug tone. I looked at him and didn't see my nephew. Anymore I saw a thief, a betrayer. I knew I couldn't go to the police empty-handed. They'd chalk it up to an old man mismanaging his accounts. So I started small. I bought a cheap spiral notebook from the Dollar General on Carson Street and wrote down every transaction I didn't recognize. I copied bank statements, underlined discrepancies, cross-checked dates. When Danielle visited, slowly a picture formed. There were charges from high-end restaurants in Shadyside nights, at luxury hotels, even flights booked out of Pittsburgh International. He wasn't just dipping his hand in the jar. He was living a life of luxury on the back of my 35 years in the mill. And then came the real gut punch. One evening he borrowed my Chevy, said he needed to pick up groceries for me. Something in his voice raised the hair on my neck. So I grabbed my coat and hopped a bus a few stops behind where he was headed. When I got off near East Liberty, I spotted my own car parked outside a luxury apartment complex. Way out of his league, I waited across the street, my heart hammering. Minutes later, he emerged. My nephew, my boy, strutting like a king. A young woman on his arm. She was half his age, dressed in a glittering cocktail dress, her hand looped through his like they owned the world. I ducked back behind the bus stop, bile rising in my throat. That was my money, paying for her dress. My money, buying their fancy dinners, their nights in luxury. I stumbled home that night, unable to sleep. The walls of my house seemed to close in, lined with photographs of my life, my sister holding Daniel as a boy, me standing proud in my steel mill, uniform years of sacrifice. And for what? To be treated like a fool. But if Daniel thought I was weak, if he thought age had made me blind or soft, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Because I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to expose him, and I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. The next morning, the sun came through the kitchen window in a weak beam that barely touched the table. The bank statements were still there, spread out like a battlefield map. I sat with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at them, feeling the weight of betrayal press down on me. I'd spent my life working 12-hour shifts at the steel mill, sweating through summers and freezing through winters, burning my lungs with smoke and my skin with sparks, just so I could retire with dignity. And here was Daniel, the boy I raised, helping himself to everything I'd built as if it were his birthright. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal at the deepest level. The detective at Zone 3 had been polite, but I'd seen the look in his eyes, skeptical. Without hard proof, I was just another old man claiming senility wasn't to blame. So I set my mind to building a case not for the police. Not just yet. For me, for my own sanity, I started with the notebook. Bought it at Dollar General spilebound with a flimsy cover. I labeled the first page, Suspicious Transactions. Each line carried a date, the amount, the supposed merchant, and a note about whether I recognized it. Soon the pages filled 425 at the Renaissance Hotel in New York, 268 at Morton's Steakhouse, 650 withdrawn in cash from a PNC ATM in Shadyside. I knew I hadn't touched that money. My hand trembled as I wrote, but my resolve grew stronger, and I watched Daniel more closely. He came round like clockwork, always on Sundays, always bringing donuts from Giant Eagle, like it was some kind of ritual. He'd sit at my table, ask how my knees were, flip through my mail with those long fingers of his. He thought I didn't notice, but I noticed every envelope he lingered on, every bill he slid a little closer to his side of the table. Every time his eyes darted to my checkbook drawer. I had to be smart. If I confronted him too soon, he'd deny it, maybe even run. If I waited, I could nail him to the wall, so I played dumb. "Danny," I said one Sunday, sipping my coffee, "you sure you don't need some help with money? You're always running around working those odd jobs. Must be hard." He laughed, leaned back in his chair, flashing that grin that had charmed teachers and girlfriends all his life. "Don't worry about me, Uncle Joe. I'm doing just fine. Yeah, finer on my dime." That's when I decided to set the trap. I made a trip to Best Buy in Homestead. The young guy in the electronics aisle looked at me sideways when I asked about hidden cameras. Like nanny cams, he asked something like that. I muttered, "Discreet." He showed me a couple small black cubes, no bigger than a pack of gum, easy to tuck behind books or knickknacks. I bought too expensive but worth every penny. Back home I called my neighbor's grandson Tyler. He was 19, good with gadgets, and owed me a favor after I helped him get his first job at the mill. Together, we set the cameras upon in the kitchen, tucked behind a row of old cookbooks, and one in the study hidden between photo frames on the desk, both pointed directly at the drawers where I kept my checks and financial papers. Uncle Joe Tyler whispered as we finished, "You really think Danielle's stealing from you?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I don't think, Tyler. I know." The cameras recorded, silently storing everything on tiny memory cards. For 2 weeks I waited. Daniel kept up his routine, still playing the devoted nephew. He mowed my lawn, brought my groceries, fixed a leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. He smiled, cracked jokes, told me I was lucky to have him, and all the while I kept my face calm, my voice steady, hiding the fury that threatened to spill over. Then one night I left a bait. I placed 3 blank checks in the study drawer, half buried under old envelopes. I knew Daniel couldn't resist. I pretended to nap in my recliner while the cameras watched. My ears strained for every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint shuffle of papers. My heart pounded like it had back in the mill when the furnace roared. Later, when I checked the footage, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the memory card. And there it was, Daniel creeping into the study, glancing over his shoulder like a thief in a bad movie. He slid the drawer open, fingers rummaging until he found the checks. His face tightened with concentration as he scribbled on one, my name mangled in his sloppy attempt at forgery. He slipped it into his pocket, closed the drawer, and left with a smug grin. I stared at the screen, tears welling in my eyes. There was my boy, the child. It raised the man it fed and clothed, caught like a rat, proof undeniable. The heartbreak cut deep, but beneath it I felt triumph. The next morning I took the footage and my notebook back to the detective. His eyes sharpened as he watched the video. "Now we've got something," he said, but he warned me it would take time. Warrants, paperwork, building a case solid enough to stick time. I didn't want to give, so while the police worked their slow grind, I sharpened my own knives. I confided in my neighbor, Mrs. Russo. She had lived next door since I was a boy, sharp as ever, even in her 80s. When I told her, she slammed her hand on her kitchen counter. That boy always had the devil's grin. I knew it. She spat. "You bring me what you've got. It'll help." Her nephew worked at a downtown bank. Within a week, I had insider confirmation of Daniel's withdrawals, verified against timestamps and security footage. And the anger in me twisted tighter when I saw those grainy images. Daniel strolling into a branch in a leather jacket. I never bought him handing over forged checks with a smirk, pretending to be some hotshot. He wasn't just stealing. He was gloating. That's when I realized exposing him quietly wasn't enough. Daniel had built an image, a mask, to the family, to the community. He was the devoted nephew, the golden boy taking care of his aging uncle. He paraded me at reunions, boasting about how he looked after me. People praised him, admired him. That mask had to be ripped away. So I began planting seeds at St. Paul's Cathedral in Oakland. I started attending Sunday Mass more regularly. Wood's grand stone walls echoed with hymns, the air heavy with incense, but my purpose was sharp. I shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and dropped hints. Funny how Daniel's living so well these days. I'd say with a chuckle, "Must for come into some money." People leaned in curious. Gossip spread faster than wildfire in that community. But gossip wasn't enough. I needed spectacle. It came at a family cookout that summer. The air was thick with Pittsburgh humidity, the smell of barbecue clinging to the grass in my sister's old backyard. Daniel was there, of course, holding court. with his booming laugh, flashing a new gold watch that gleamed in the sun. Relatives surrounded him, soaking up his charm. I waited until everyone had their plates, burgers, potato salad, corn on the cob. The chatter buzzed. Kids darted through the yard, and I felt my heart pounding like a war drum. I stood slowly, cane tapping against the patio stones. I have something to say about Daniel. I announced. The chatter died. Faces turned. Daniel froze, his smile stiffening. What's this about Uncle Joe? He asked, his tone still syrupy sweet. I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. A copy of one of the forged checks. My hand trembled, but my voice was steady. This is what it's about. My nephew has been stealing from me for years, forging my name, emptying my accounts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Forks clinked against plates. Daniel's face flushed red, then drained white. That's ridiculous, he stammered. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. But I was ready. I pulled up my phone, opened the video, and held it high. On the screen, Daniel rifled through my drawer, scribbling my name on a check. The silence was suffocating. Then came the whispers, the pointing fingers, the shifting eyes. Daniel's girlfriend jerked her arm away from him. Disgust on her face. Is this true? She demanded. He sputtered, scrambled for excuses, but the evidence spoke louder than his lies. I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked away, my cane striking the stones like a gavel. Behind me, the family murmured. Fractured, divided, Daniel's golden mask was shattered. Later that night, my phone lit up with messages, cousins, old friends, neighbors. The story had spread through the family like a storm, leaving Daniel's reputation in ashes. But humiliation was just the beginning. I didn't want him embarrassed. I wanted him destroyed. The fallout from that cookout was immediate and vicious. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. By the next morning, half the family had already taken sides. My phone buzzed non-stop. Some cousins calling to say they believed me, others telling me I was tearing the family apart. You don't know what you're doing. Uncle Joe, one of them hissed over the line. Daniel's a good man. You're just old. You're confused. Confused. That word cut deeper than the theft. I wasn't losing my mind. I knew what I saw, but the seed of doubt Daniel had planted, whispering about my supposed senility, was already sprouting. In people's minds, Daniel himself avoided me after that day. He didn't come by with donuts anymore. He didn't call, but I could feel his shadow. Friends in the neighborhood told me they'd seen him muttering in bars on East Carson, bad-mouthing me to anyone who'd listen. He told them I was trying to ruin him because I was bitter and lonely. But the real blow came 2 weeks later in the form of a letter. It was from a law office, downtown sleek, stationery embossed logo. Inside was a notice that Daniel had retained counsel. His lawyer claimed I was making false accusations, that I was confused and possibly being manipulated. They suggested my bank had made errors, and I had blamed my nephew out of paranoia. I sat at my kitchen table, letter trembling in my hand, my coffee growing cold. Daniel wasn't just stealing anymore. He was trying to erase me. The rage that boiled in my chest was hotter than any blast furnace. I'd worked beside. I called the detective. He told me not to worry, that the video evidence was solid, that the DA was preparing charges, but trials took time, months. And during those months, Daniel was free. Out on bail, he became more dangerous. The whispers in the grocery store grew louder. At St. Paul's, some parishioners avoided my gaze altogether. Daniel's charm had always been his weapon, and he wielded it even now, spinning his story until good people doubted their own eyes. I realized then that destroying him in court wouldn't be enough. If I wanted true revenge, I had to tear down the mask. He wore the image of the devoted nephew. So I dug deeper with Mrs. Russo's nephews. Help, I got access. not just to my accounts, but Daniel's. And what I saw made me sick. The money he'd stolen wasn't just for dinners and watches. He had a gambling problem. Atlantic City casinos, online betting apps, thousands gone in a single night. Worse, he was in debt. 2 loan sharks to bookies, men who didn't take kindly to being stiffed. The realization hit me like a steel beam. Daniel wasn't just arrogant. He was reckless, desperate, and spiraling. The next time he came by, uninvited, he tried to act casual. Sat at my table, poured my coffee, smiled like nothing had happened. I let him ramble for a while about how unfair things were, how people were out to get him. Then, when his guard was down, I leaned forward and asked quietly, "How much do you owe them?" Danny, his hand froze halfway to his mouth, the coffee trembling in the cup. His eyes flicked to mine, wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "The debts," I said evenly. "Atlantic City. The bookies. I know Daniel." The color drained from his face. He muttered something about not knowing what I was talking about, grabbed his coat and stormed out. But I knew then I had found his nerve. Over the next few weeks, I made sure that nerve stayed raw. I didn't need to confront him directly. I just let words slip carefully, quietly, to the people he owed money to. A hint here, a whisper there, that he was on trial for fraud, that his money wasn't his own, that he was broke. It didn't take long for the pressure to mount. Daniel stopped strutting. His clothes grew rumpled. He lost weight. His easy grin twisted into something desperate. I saw him pacing the street outside. One night, phone clutched to his ear, yelling into the dark. He stopped showing up at family events altogether. The trial date crept closer. His lawyer filed motions trying to delay. But every delay only worked in my favor. Outside of court, his world was collapsing. I knew I needed one final public blow to finish him off before the trial. Something that would burn away whatever sympathy he had left, so I arranged it. St. Paul's was holding a fundraiser for roof repairs, a parish hall gathering, with half the community invited. I made sure to be there, and I knew Daniel would come too. He couldn't resist keeping up appearances. The hall smelled of coffee and pierogies, chatter echoing off the stone walls. Father O'Malley thanked everyone for their generosity, and people clapped politely. That's when I raised my hand. "I've got something to share," I said, my voice carrying through the room. Daniel was there, slick hair, combed, smile stretched tight. His eyes flicked to me nervously. I pulled out a manila envelope and opened it. Inside were copies of his betting slips, his online gambling logs, overdraft notices, all tied directly to the money stolen from me. The crowd gasped as I laid the papers on the table for all to see. "This," I said, steady and clear, "is what Daniel did with my money. Not caring for me, not paying bills, gambling, drinking, women. All while pretending to be the good nephew." The silence was heavy as stone. Then came the whispers, the shifting eyes, the disgusted stares. Daniel's face turned crimson. He trembled his hands, fists at his side. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is fake," but no one believed him anymore. The mask was gone. That night he stormed out of the parish hall. I watched him go, shoulders hunched, head down. And I knew then I had broken him. But breaking a man like Daniel only made him more dangerous. Because the next time he came to my house, he wasn't smiling. It was a late evening rain, slanting against the windows. I was sitting in my recliner when the knock came hard, insistent I open the door, to find him standing there, drenched eyes, bloodshot, reeking of whiskey. "You think you've won," he spat, slamming his fist against the doorframe so hard I jumped. "You think you can ruin me and just walk away? I'll ruin you. Old man, I swear to God. My heart pounded, but I stood my ground. You already ruined me, Daniel. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole. You destroyed this family. For a moment I thought he might hit me. His jaw clenched, his fists shook, but then he turned and stormed off into the rain, cursing under his breath. I locked the door, my hands trembling, and sat awake the entire night with the baseball bat beside my chair. I called the detective the next morning. He told me to be careful, that Daniel's threats only strengthened the case. But I knew then this wasn't just about the trial anymore. Daniel was cornered. And a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. The weeks that followed felt like living with a storm cloud parked over my roof. Daniel didn't come around with donuts anymore. He didn't offer to mow the lawn or fix the leaky sink. No, he prowled instead. I'd catch glimpses of him from my front window, his car creeping down the block, headlights cutting through the dusk. Once I spotted him leaning against a lamppost across the street, smoking, his eyes locked on my house like a predator, watching prey. The family was split down. The middle half of them had stopped talking to me entirely. Convinced by Daniel's lies that I was a bitter old man out to destroy the only family I had left, the other half whispered support, but kept their distance, afraid of being dragged into the mess. Church folk eyed me differently. Now some with pity. Some with respect, but pity cut deeper than anything. I tried to keep my head down, tried to live as though things were normal. I'd walk down Carson Street to buy milk, nod at the cashier, make small talk with neighbors, but I could feel the tension coiling tighter every day. Then came the night of the break-in. It was around 2 a.m. I was dozing in my recliner, the baseball bat resting across my lap, when I heard a faint scraping at the back door. My heart leapt into my throat. I held my breath. Listening, the sound came again. Sharper this time, the unmistakable click of a lock being worked. I rose quietly, my knees creaking, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles whitened. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. When I reached it, I yanked it open in a single motion. And there he was. Daniel stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, eyes bloodshot and wild. A crowbar hung from his hand. His chest heaved, his face pale. For a long moment we just stared at each other. Uncle and nephew bound by blood, but divided by betrayal. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. His lips quivered. I just need some money. Just a little, please. Uncle Joe. They're going to kill me if I don't pay. His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw not the thief, not the liar, but the terrified boy, it once tucked into bed. But the image shattered as quickly as it came. "You think breaking into my house is the answer?" I shouted, raising the bat. "You're done. Daniel. Done." His shoulders sagged. The crowbar slipped from his hand and clattered against the wet pavement. He stumbled backward, muttering curses under his breath, then disappeared into the shadows of the night. I slammed the door, locked it, and pressed my back against it, chest heaving. The next morning I filed another report with the detective. That was it, the last straw. The DA decided to fast-track the trial. When the court date finally arrived, I felt like I was walking into a furnace all over again. The Allegheny County Courthouse loomed tall and solemn, its stone walls heavy with history. Inside the courtroom was vast ceilings high, the wood polished to a sheen. It smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I sat in the front row cane, resting against my knee. Evidence folder clutched in my lap. My palms were damp, my throat dry. I wasn't afraid of Daniel anymore, but I was afraid of being dismissed of the system, failing me. Daniel sat across the room at the defense table. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his once smug grin had soured into something bitter, desperate. His lawyer, a slick man with sharp features and a voice smooth as oil, whispered furiously in his ear. Daniel nodded his leg, bouncing under the table. The trial began. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. They presented the bank statements, the forged checks, the ATM footage, even the video of Daniel caught rifling through my study drawer. Each piece landed like a hammer. I watched the jury lean in, their faces tightening with each new revelation. But then the defense had their turn. Daniel's lawyer stood tall, adjusting his tie, and began to weave a story. He painted me as a lonely old man, bitter, paranoid, slipping into senility. He claimed the signatures on the checks could have been mine, that I was confused, that I had forgotten. He brought in a so-called handwriting expert who argued the forgeries could have been legitimate. And then Daniel himself took the stand. He looked at the jury with those wide, innocent eyes, the same ones that had fooled teachers, girlfriends, and even me for years. His voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. "My uncle's been having memory issues," he said softly. "He forgets things, gets paranoid. I've always been there for him, helping with his finances, making sure he's okay. Now he thinks I'm stealing from him. It breaks my heart." My fists clenched, the gall of it, the sheer gall. When it was my turn, I shuffled to the witness stand, leaning on my cane. My voice shook at first, but then steadied. As I told my story, I spoke of the years it raised him, of the sacrifices it made, of the moment I realized my own blood had betrayed me. I showed the jury my notebook, the meticulous notes it kept, and then the prosecution played the video. The courtroom went silent as the screen lit up with grainy footage. There was Daniel, clear as day, sliding open my drawer, pulling out a check forging my name. The jury leaned forward, eyes fixed. Daniel buried his face in his hands. That was the moment the mask slipped for good. The trial stretched over days, each. One drained me. I'd come home exhausted, collapse into my recliner and stare at the photographs on my wall. The ones of my sister, of Daniel as a boy. The weight of it pressed heavy on my chest. Finally, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as he sentenced Daniel to 5 years in prison. The gavel came down final and sharp. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victory. But instead, as I sat there, I felt hollow, because Daniel wasn't just my nephew. He was the boy I'd raised, the last living piece of my sister. And now he was gone. By his own hand, his own choices. I walked out of that courthouse into the crisp Pittsburgh air. The city hummed with life around me, cars honking, people rushing, pigeons scattering. And for the first time in years, I breathed freely. But the cost was carved into me. At night, I still heard the scrape of that crowbar at my door. I still saw Daniel's face in the rain, begging, trembling. Terrified, I still felt the sting of betrayal. Every time I looked at the empty chair across my kitchen table, I had exposed him, I had destroyed him. And yet I knew the shadow of what he'd done would follow me until my last breath. Because revenge, even when it's justified, never leaves you clean. It leaves you scarred, and it leaves you haunted. The courthouse verdict should have been the end. Guilty on all counts, 5 years in prison. The book closed, but life doesn't tie up its loose ends so neatly. The weeks after the trial were strange, quiet but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet you get after a steel furnace shuts down, when the air still carries the heat and smoke, even though the fire's gone out. My house felt emptier than it ever had. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the lamps, crooked shade, the same lamp that had illuminated the first evidence of Daniel's betrayal, and I'd feel that gnawing ache in my chest. Neighbors stopped by sometimes, offering casseroles, sympathy, or just silence. Some looked at me with respect, others with pity I didn't know, which I hated. More, pity was like a knife. It cut deeper than the theft, deeper than the betrayal the family had shattered. Half of them still refused to speak to me. They believed Daniel's lies, convinced I'd ruined him out of bitterness. The other half sent the occasional letter or phone call, awkward words of support that felt too little too late. Holidays came and went without the laughter, without the noise. Thanksgiving dinner that year was me at the table with a reheated Stauffer's turkey meal. The restitution order from the court was a joke. A few $100 dribbled in here and there, but the bulk of what Daniel stole was gone spent on hotel rooms, dinners, watches, and debts that could never be repaid. I wasn't starving, thank God. My pension kept the lights on, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the years it poured into him, the sacrifices it made, and the way he spat on all of it. One grey afternoon I found myself back in Shenley Park. The trees were bare, the air cold, the path slick with fallen leaves. I sat on a bench near the playground. Where I'd once taught Daniel to ride a bike, I could still see it. His skinny arms gripping the handlebars, his voice shrieking with laughter as I let go, and he wobbled down the path. He'd look back at me with such joy, shouting, "I did it, Uncle Joe." I buried my face in my hands, the memory cutting like glass. How did that boy turn into the man who forged my name and drained my accounts? How did love curdle into betrayal so complete? I didn't have answers. All I had was the ache Daniel's sentencing made headlines in the local paper. A small piece tucked between crime reports and sports scores. Local man convicted of forgery fraud against elderly uncle. The photo they used was from his mugshot, eyes hollow mouth, twisted in defiance. When I saw it, I felt no triumph, just grief. But prison had its own way of grinding men down. About 6 months into his sentence, I got a letter. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting shaky. It was from Daniel Uncle Joe. It began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I have to try. I messed up. I got in too deep. I never meant to hurt you. I was scared. I didn't know how to stop. Please believe me. I'm sorry." I read it once. Then again, my hand shook my chest heavy, and then I folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't reply, because sorry doesn't refill a lifetime of savings. Sorry doesn't erase the humiliation. Sorry doesn't stitch back the trust once it's been ripped to shreds. He sent 2 more letters over the next year. Both I tucked away, both unopened after the first glance. Word from the prison trickled back through acquaintances. Daniel wasn't doing well. He'd gotten into fights. He owed debts inside too. Whatever charm had carried him through the outside world didn't carry him behind bars. The wolves smelled weakness on him and they tore at it. Part of me should have pitied him, but pity was something I couldn't afford any more. Not for Daniel, I focused instead on surviving the days I took. Long walks through Southside, past the same stoops where Id played as a boy. I volunteered at St. Paul's, helping with odd tasks, folding bulletins, sweeping floors. Father O'Malley told me I was strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only the shell. One night, though I dreamed of my sister, she was young again, her hair dark, her laugh ringing through the air like a bell. She held Daniel in her arms. The baby swaddled tight, his tiny hand gripping her finger. She looked at me with those kind eyes and whispered, "Protect him. I woke with tears on my face. I had protected him. I'd given him everything I had. But in the end, you can't protect someone from themselves. Years crawled by. Daniel served his time. I counted the days, not because I wanted him back, but because the thought of him walking free again kept me up at night. I imagined him standing outside my door, again, eyes bloodshot, crowbar in hand. But the day finally came. Greene County Prison released him after serving 4 years with good behavior. The news came not from him, but from a cousin, who called me voice tight with nerves. "Hair's out," she said, "just so you know." I nodded, thanked her, and hung up. My hands trembled as I locked every window in the house, double-checked every door. The baseball bat returned to its place beside my bed. But Daniel never came. Not that week, not that month, not that year. It was as though he'd vanished from Pittsburgh altogether. Maybe he fled to another city. Maybe he crawled into some hole and stayed there. Maybe the bookies finally caught up with him. I didn't know, I didn't care. All I knew was the silence that followed. It should have felt like peace, but instead it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the winds to pick back up. The community never fully healed from it. My name carried whispers wherever I went. Some still saw me as the hero who stood up for himself. Others saw me as the bitter uncle who sent his own blood to prison. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the scar the whole ordeal left behind. I learned to live with it. The years pressed on. I grew older. My knees stiffened more. My walks grew shorter. The world outside changed. New restaurants, new buildings, new faces in the neighborhood. But the ghost in my house never left. It'd sit in my recliner at night, the photograph staring back at me from the walls. My sister's smile, Daniel's toothy grin as a boy, missing front teeth, eyes sparkling with mischief. I'd stare at those photos until the edges blurred with tears. And I'd whisper to the empty room, I brought him down. No matter the cost, I brought him down. Because if I didn't remind myself of that, if I didn't cling to that truth, the weight of the grief might have crushed me. Still, there were nights when the silence grew heavy, when the scrape of a crowbar seemed to echo faintly in my mind, when I wondered if blood ever really washes off. And the answer I always came back to was no. Bloodstains and betrayal never leaves you clean. Daniel's release cast a shadow over my life, even though I never saw his face again. It was like a ghost had been freed from prison, not a man. The day I heard he was out, I sat on my porch in the late afternoon, the sun sinking over the Pittsburgh skyline. The air smelled faintly of grilled meat from a neighbor's cookout, but all I tasted was dread. My hands shook on the armrests of my old porch chair. My mind ran circles. Would he come straight here? Would he want revenge? Would he wait lurking until I dropped my guard? I stayed outside until nightfall, listening for every sound, every crunch of gravel, every car passing too slowly. Nothing came. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I started to believe he was really gone, but peace never came. Because peace doesn't live in a house that's been violated. It'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced I heard the scrape of metal at the back door again. It gripped the baseball bat until dawn, staring at the dark corners of the room. Sometimes I swore I saw his shadow on the wall just out of reach. Other times I'd hear his voice in my head, whispering the same words he'd spat the night he tried to break in. "You ruin me. I'll ruin you." That whisper was worse than prison bars. I tried to fill the silence with routine. Mornings, I walked the block nodding to Mrs. Russo when she waved from her porch. Afternoons I'd stop at the Giant Eagle, grab milk, maybe a sandwich. Evenings I sat in my recliner, flipping through old photo albums. Each picture was a stab wound. Daniel in his baseball uniform, me beaming beside him. Daniel blowing out birthday candles. Daniel holding up his high school diploma, my arm around his shoulder. Those weren't just photos. They were proof of my failure. Proof that I had poured decades of love into a boy who had traded it all for greed and lies. Sometimes I talked to those photos whispering like a madman. Why, Danny? Why'd you do it? Wasn't I enough? Wasn't everything I gave you enough? The photos never answered. One evening I got another letter. The handwriting was Danielle's. I nearly tore it up without opening it, but something in me wanted to see what ghost he was trying to raise this time. Uncle Joe, it began, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying, I'm working odd jobs. I'm staying out of trouble. I've been clean from gambling for 8 months. I know I ruined everything, but I'm still your blood. I hope someday you can remember me as more than a thief. I read it 3 times, my chest tight, my hands trembling. Then I folded it back into the envelope and slid it into the same drawer where the other letters sat, because I couldn't throw them away. But I couldn't answer either. Answering would mean reopening the wound, and some wounds are meant to scar over, not heal. That night I dreamed again of Diane, my sister. She stood in our childhood yard, the smell of lilacs in the air, Daniel as a toddler in her arms. She smiled at me, but her eyes were sad. Family, she whispered. Blood. I woke, gasping my pillow damp with sweat. The years pressed on, seasons turned. The Steelers lost and won the neighborhood. Kids grew taller. I grew older. 70 came and went. My knees stiffened, my hands shook more often, and yet my mind stayed sharp. Too sharp. Maybe sharp enough to replay every betrayal, every forged check, every smug grin, until the memories felt fresher than the present. Daniel never came back to Pittsburgh, at least not to my street. Some said he moved to Ohio, others that he'd gone south to try his luck somewhere new. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. Let him disappear. Let him vanish like smoke. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't vanish with the betrayer. It stays stitched into your bones. The church fundraiser where I'd exposed him became local legend. Years later, people still whispered about the night. Old Joe Mancini stood up in front of the whole parish and burned his nephew's mask to ash. Some said I was brave. Others said I was cruel. I didn't argue. Both were true. One cold December. I walked past the courthouse where he'd been sentenced. Snowflakes swirled in the air, settling on the stone steps. I stopped and stared up at the building. The memory of the gavel striking still echoing in my head. 5 years had passed. Daniel had served his time, but my sentence wasn't over. My sentence was living every day with the memory that my own blood had gutted me. People sometimes asked if I regretted. If I regretted dragging the family name through the mud, putting Daniel behind bars, shattering whatever ties we had left. And my answer was always the same. No, because the truth was already in the mud. I just made sure everyone saw it. Still in the quiet hours of the night when the house creaked and the shadows stretched long, I wondered what my sister would say if she could see us now. Would she curse me for exposing her son? Or would she thank me for finally stopping him before he destroyed more lives? We'll never know. But here's what I do know. Betrayal leaves a mark. It carves you out and hollows you. It teaches you that blood isn't thicker than greed, and sometimes the knife that cuts deepest is the one wielded by the hand you trusted most. And yet there's a strange kind of strength in surviving it. Because Daniel thought he could break me. He thought he could bleed me dry, leave me a husk and walk away, smiling. But I'm still here. Every morning I wake up, make my coffee, and sit at that same kitchen table. The crooked lamp still hums faintly above the wood, scarred with years of use. And every morning I remind myself I didn't let him win. I exposed him. I destroyed him. I showed him and the world that even an old man can fight back. And if he ever does come back, if the day comes when I open my door to find him standing there again, eyes full of that same desperate hunger, I know exactly what he'll do. I won't hesitate. Because revenge isn't always about the fire of the moment. Sometimes it's about the cold certainty you carry for the rest of your life, that you'll never be a victim again. And that certainty is what lets me sleep at night even when the ghosts whisper. That certainty is what lets me breathe. That certainty is my revenge. By the time I turned 72, the city around me had changed so much I hardly recognized it. New restaurants cropped up on East Carson College. Kids filled the sidewalks. Tech companies moved into neighborhoods that once smelled of steel and sweat. But my house stayed the same. Same crooked lamp, same creaking floorboards, same photographs on the walls, and the same ghosts. Daniel never came back. Not to me, not to the street we once called ours. Sometimes I wondered if he was alive at all. Rumors drifted in through the grapevine. He was in Ohio, working odd jobs. He was down south trying to start over. He'd been seen in a casino in Atlantic City, looking older, thinner, worn down. None of it mattered. I didn't chase the rumors. I didn't need to. Because even in absence, Daniel was everywhere I saw him. In the faces of young men on the corner, laughing with that same reckless arrogance. I heard him in the creak of my back door at night, the phantom scrape of metal that still woke me in a sweat. I felt him in the cold space across my kitchen table, the space where he once sat, calling me Uncle Joe, with a grin as he plotted my ruin. I carried him like a scar. The family never healed from it. Cousins still crossed the street to avoid me, unwilling to pick sides. The few who stood by me grew quieter over the years, the way people do when time wears them down. Holidays passed without calls. Birthdays slipped by unnoticed. Sometimes I wondered if that was Daniel's true revenge. Not the theft, not the humiliation, but the silence he left behind. Still I lived. I found small joys in the routine. Morning walks past the row houses. Afternoons spent at the library, thumbing through old history books. Evenings with the ball game on the radio, the voice of the announcer crackling like it had when I was a boy. And sometimes in those quiet evenings, I'd catch myself almost speaking to Daniel, almost saying, "Remember when we went to Three Rivers? Remember the foam fingers, the hot dogs, the way you cheered so loud? You lost your voice." But the words always caught in my throat because the boy I raised was gone, buried under the man who betrayed me. One winter night I dreamed again of my sister Diane stood in our parents' kitchen, flour on her hands, her laugh warm as sunlight. Daniel was there too, just a child tugging at her apron. She looked at me, her eyes searching, and said softly, "Family doesn't excuse everything." I woke with tears freezing on my cheeks. The years marched on. I grew slower, my steps shorter. My hair thinned, my hands shook more often. But my mind stayed sharp. Too sharp, sharp enough to cut myself on memories. I couldn't dull suddenly sit at the kitchen table and reread Daniel's letters, the ones I kept tucked away in the drawer. Each one begged forgiveness. Each one promised he was trying to change. But they were just words. and words couldn't erase the look on his face when he forged my name or the scrape of that crowbar at my door. I never answered them. I never would, because forgiveness isn't something you give to someone who never earned it. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out just because blood ties you together. Forgiveness is earned through loyalty, through sacrifice, through love. And Daniel had burned all of that to ash. One spring afternoon, I sat on my porch and watched the kids on the block ride their bikes. Their laughter echoed down the street. And for a moment, I saw Danielle among them, young again, eyes bright, shouting, "I did it, Uncle Joe." The memory twisted in my chest like a blade, because betrayal doesn't erase the good times. It corrupts them, it poisons them, makes you question whether the laughter was ever real, whether the love was ever true. You'll never know. But I do know this. I survived. I survived the theft, the humiliation, the whispers, the loneliness. I survived Daniel's threats, his lies, his attempts to erase me. I survived the trial, the verdict, the hollow years after. And that survival is my revenge, because Daniel thought he could bleed me dry. Leave me broken and walk away with my life in his pocket, but I'm still here. Every morning I wake up, make my coffee sit under the crooked lamp, and remind myself I won. Not because I destroyed him in court, not because I humiliated him in front of family and friends, but because I'm still standing. Because I never let him strip me bare and leave me a victim. And if the day ever comes when he returns, when he knocks on my door, older, thinner, desperate, begging for forgiveness, he won't find it. What he'll find is the same uncle who raised him, the same uncle who brought him down, the same uncle who will never let betrayal go unanswered. Because revenge isn't just fire. It's cold steel. It's certainty. And I carry that certainty with me every single day. So, when people ask me now in my old age if I regret it, if I regret exposing my own blood, sending him to prison, shattering the family, I give them the same answer every time. No, because blood may tie us, but it doesn't excuse us. And once blood betrays you, there's no turning back. That's the truth I live with. That's the truth I'll die with. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the house creaks and the wind scrapes against the windows, I hear it again. The faint echo of a crowbar at the door, and I smile. Because I know if Daniel ever does return, he won't find an old man waiting to be broken. He'll find the same uncle who already destroyed him once, and who will do it again. The end.